And hi, everybody. Welcome back to Fresh Outlook. I'm TWB. Well, earlier this week, the Supreme Court heard a challenge to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So the question is, are Americans' rights in jeopardy? You decide. Let's take a look.
Recently, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments against a monumental piece of civil rights legislation, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The case could lead to the court striking down Section 5 of the law, which protects minority voting rights in states with a history of discrimination. Congress reauthorized the Voting Rights Act in 2006 after extensive research and with almost universal approval. However, today some claim the protections are outdated and don't belong in our post-Jim Crow era. On the other side of the debate, supporters of the Voting Rights Act say it's still desperately needed.
There is a calculated attempt on disenfranchising people, as many as possible. The pendulum has swung completely backward. We're going back to the Jim Crow days.
They cite, for example, the last election, when the Justice Department used Section 5 to block new voter ID laws in Texas and South Carolina, as well as early voting restrictions in Florida. So as the Supreme Court comes to a decision later this year on the challenge, the nation wrestles with tough questions. Has the U.S. outgrown the Voting Rights Act of 1965? And what can be done in any case to strengthen enfranchisement for all Americans?
Some great questions. I can't wait to get the conversation started. But before we do that, let's meet the panelists, shall we? Let's start with John. Tell us who you are, where you're from, and why you decided to join us.
John Patti. I'm an attorney at law in Red Bank, New Jersey, and I'm a legal expert.
Excellent. Looking forward to your legal insight. Saladin, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I'm Saladin Ambar. I teach American politics at Lehigh University.
Oh, great. Some more insightful information to be digested. And Dee Dee.
I'm a political analyst, and I was an assistant of President Bush.
All right, terrific. Well, the main question is, as the piece said, has America outgrown the Voting Rights Act of 1965? Does it not reflect sort of contemporary realities? Or is this a blow to the civil rights movement? What do we think? John, let's start with you.
Absolutely not. I think...
Not what? Which part?
It is not a blow to the civil rights movement. If anything, let's look to who's our president, who's in our Congress, what did the act... what was it enacted for? What were some of the things that we hope to get out of it? We got everything out of it. In fact, one of the questions in the Supreme Court to the Solicitor General is, do you think people in South are more racially discriminatory than people from the North? And the answer was no. So it was a temporary solution.
I don't think you can just ask one person that question and you have a definitive answer. But but I disagree with you, because I think just because we have an African American in the office, that doesn't mean it's secure. It doesn't mean that there still aren't voting rights problems in the South. So, Saladin, what do you think?
Well, certainly President Obama doesn't have magical powers just because he's the first African American president. And so I think that we have to look at specific cases and look at the state where I live, Pennsylvania, which sought to and ultimately enacted voter ID laws, which have clearly a disproportionate and disparate impact on the ability of not only African Americans and Latinos to vote, but the elderly, the indigent, lower middle class people to get off work. And these kinds of voter ID laws that were passed around the country primarily, in fact, almost exclusively by Republican legislatures, clearly had the intent, as the Secretary of State of Pennsylvania said, to help Mitt Romney win the election. So we have to, call it for what it is.
So you think the Voting Rights Act should remain as it is?
I think absolutely. I think the burden, if there is one, is bureaucratic, but I'd rather have a bureaucratic burden than the burden of people being denied the right to vote. I don't think the two are comparable.
Okay, Dee Dee, what are your thoughts?
That's absolutely ridiculous. I mean,
what's ridiculous?
It's ridiculous that you do not have to have voter ID to vote. You have to have voter ID to walk into any building, to get a Blockbuster card, to do anything and everything. In fact, even Holder's office, you think you can get in that building without an ID? Nope. But you don't have to have an ID to vote. And to say that it's unfair is ridiculous. I tell you who it's unfair to. It's unfair to the people who vote legitimately, and then when others don't, it cancels out their vote, and that's not right at all. Everyone should have voter ID. Everyone should have ID to do it. How do you function in society without it? So you're wrong, and to say that the Republicans are the people in charge of this and one pushing this because they want to disenfranchise is ridiculous. We just want it to be fair and we want everyone to have one vote to one person.
Why is
Well,
voter
I was just
fraud?
quoting the Secretary of State of Pennsylvania, so
Well,
I wasn't
and funny
making
how
anything up.
in
I didn't
certain
invent that
precincts-
comment.
In certain precincts in Pennsylvania, they voted over 100%. And how does that happen? That's kind of fishy, isn't
Well,
it?
if it's fishy, it was only fishy since Barack Obama became president.
No,
right?
it's the
there were
facts,
no
it's the
these
numbers.
voter ID laws are sprung up very recently
You have
because
to
of
have
a
voter ID.
demographic.
You have to have ID to do anything in life.
Well,
anything.
and IDs were in place before 2012 and 2008. People have been voting with IDs, but there were specific kinds of IDs. Take my mom, for example. She doesn't drive in New York City.
doesn't
Many
have
people-
to. Anybody can get an ID.
It's certain kinds of IDs that are required. The idea was to move the goalposts to set up a situation where people would be disproportionately impacted who were Democrats.
Right.
That's why the Secretary of
But
State.
It's ridiculous. It's
why
not
is
true.
it-
Let's hear from John, yeah.
Why is it discriminatory to have an ID?
It's not.
It's
why,
not.
But hold on.
It's not.
Why do we say that because you need an ID, all of a sudden it disenfranchises Latinos and blacks? That is insulting to
Why
that
do you
community.
pass the law?
How do you
Why do you
fly
pass the
on
law?
a plane,
Well,
Professor?
she made
How
that
do you
point.
do that?
She made that point very clearly.
I'd
but-
like to go and say, you
Well-
know what? You're discriminating against me because I don't have as much hair as you do, and I'm not making that
Well,
flight.
let's leave the ID
Let me just
matter.
say
Matter
that
flying
in
and
2006,
voting.
Congress reinstated the act. So why is this a big? Why is this happening? Why now? What's
Let
the
me
problem?
tell you why it's happening.
Tell us.
Because it's a pre-clearance. And for these particular states, there's only a certain amount of states. There were 6 of the Confederate states. There's actually part of Alaska.
Yep.
There's part of New Hampshire.
Part
there's
of
a couple
Florida,
counties
California,
in,
New York
in
City.
Michigan. And they're saying if you want to change anything having to do with voting, you got to go to Eric Holder. I got a problem with that. So voter ID all of a sudden discriminates
It's
against
not
poor
voter.
people.
It's not voter ID. It's the type of ID imposed months before a new
Right.
election out of nowhere.
Last
So you
minute.
would have no
It's a
problem with
last
ID
minute
going
change,
now,
and
right?
it gives
If you
people
don't-
just disadvantage.
If
I
the,
mean,
Why do you
if the
say
quantity
that?
of
because
time,
it's a fact.
if the quantity of
It's
time
not
made
a
you right,
fact.
you'd be doing well. But I'd like to get in one word here, if I may. There are 2 of you against me here, and I think
I'm
in
a
the
lawyer.
issue-
I try not to.
I
let people.
think
I know
everything's fine
lawyers
the way it
pretty
is.
well,
I have to say, I'm actually leaning towards your
Well,
side. I don't
I
know
just
what
think
I don't
it's-
know what the big deal is. Just
Let me
keep
bring
things
you
the way
to
they
my
are.
side, okay? I want to bring you over.
Well, let him
here.
talk. He wants to talk. Well, let him talk.
Yeah.
So here's the bottom line. Why did the Secretary of State of Pennsylvania say that this was going to help Mitt Romney win if it was completely apolitical? You're welcome
what
to
they
argue
said.
this way.
Finish
You're welcome
up.
to argue this way on the behalf of Republican talking points, but I'll just say this, that there's not a Latino or African American or Asian out there in the world listening to this who's going to think, gee, these guys really want to reach out to me. This is a new kind of Republican Party.
It's a different topic.
Well, no,
You're off topic.
No, it's directly related because this is an issue designed to repress African Americans
Absolutely
and
not.
Latinos from showing up
It's
at the polls.
insulting
And if you
to
want to
say
continue
that.
to make the
It's
argument that the Voting
absolutely
Rights Act
insulting.
is some kind of insult or,
No, it's not.
No, it's insulting what
it's
you're
a
saying.
pre-clearance.
They're
Guys,
trying to repress.
hold that thought. We do have someone holding on the line. I want to introduce another panelist. We should have Kenneth Salaam, human rights activist. He also marched with Dr. King back in the day. Kenneth, are you there?
Yes.
Hi, good to have you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
So I don't know if you've heard the conversation so far, but weigh in. Will this be a blow to civil rights, or is it time for a change and sort of one-size-fits-all voting rights?
I think that when you look at the time today, the Section 5 of the pre-clearance provision in the Voting Rights Act, I think it should still stand for a while. I mean, I don't see that much change has happened for the U.S. Supreme Court to disregard that provision just based on people, African Americans in larger numbers, having the right to vote. With what's going on now, and you have Latinos and other minorities who are now being subjected to scrutinization in order for them to vote. You know, I remember in 1965 when I was in Mississippi, trying to get people registered to vote, and it was a very nasty time, and to see the opposition, the kind of hate in the eyes and in the voices of the opposition, which it really was pitiful. And to think, and remember, those were moral decisions that those people made to deny people their rights to express themselves through the political process. And to think in 49 years or 50 years that you can wipe out something or a moral position, it's not credible. You were talking about Pennsylvania. I'll give you an example here in Pennsylvania. It was a young lady, well, I call her young, she was about 98 years old, and she was the person who was able to bring the legalities to the issue here in Pennsylvania with voter ID. Now, here's an African American who didn't have a birth certificate, because back in years ago when African Americans were born, they didn't have birth certificates. Most of the African Americans, my generation, my grandmother and her mother generation, most of the births were recorded in Bibles. So there was no real so-called legal paper to show that she was this person and born this particular date, but she had been voting at this particular polling place for years.
Right.
And Pennsylvania governor, the governor of Pennsylvania, now you're allowed to vote, but they have this provision. They were trying to put a provision in place where people they can get somewhere the legislation where they could change the vote, where if the candidate, the national candidate, which they were really pushing during this last election, as I heard someone say earlier.
I don't mean to cut you off, but I do want to just have some of the other panelists weigh in. What do you think? What's your response to what he said, John?
We're not doing away with the 15th Amendment. It is still a wrong to discriminate against someone and take away that person's voting rights based on their religion or color or anything else. This is just saying we've grown. Justice Kennedy, times have changed. Okay, we're beyond this. We don't have to babysit.
I was just reading an article from Donna Brazil, and she said, Justice John Roberts says, things have changed in the South, just like you. But
Justice Kennedy.
No, Justice John Roberts said that. He said things have changed in the South. That's a direct quote. And people say, oh, really? Well, they tried to cut early voting hours in certain counties in Florida. In Texas, they tried to impose strict and unforgiving burdens on minorities and poor people. So that's why these laws are still needed. And are they bothering you and me? No. But if it's helping people vote in the South, why not just leave it alone?
I don't have any problem with helping people vote. I do have a problem with fraud. I don't like when someone does not play by the rules. Now, that's not to insinuate any race, any religion, any party is not playing by the rules. But I want to make sure that if Senator Smith ran for election, I want to make sure there was no fraud associated with that. So if that means changing the election law to come with an ID, then you do it. And if there's a problem, there's a solution for that. You can go right to the county judge.
How many cases of voter fraud?
A lot.
How many?
A
lot is not a number.
All the time.
A lot is not a number.
Even if it happens once, it's one too many.
Sure,
and it does happen. And you know what? Everybody should be one vote, one person.
You don't impose the burden on an entire community.
And why should you have voter ID? Why you should have ID to even vote? And not only that, I think it should be even stricter. So whenever you have absentee ballots, you need to have ID for that as well.
The challenge is that there's this, Justice Roberts has this view, and I think the folks on this panel have this view that we have entered into some post-racial, colorblind society where these laws, things have changed, I was told. I remember going to New York City in the 1990s, mid-90s, the most cosmopolitan city on the earth, being asked, what kind of name is Ambar? Are you black? It got to the point where I had to say, listen, I'm an African-American, is that a problem?
And again, I don't know if we can say things separate issue. I think you need to step in the shoes of people voting in the South.
But that's why we have laws that, if anything, other states or entities or municipalities need to opt in or bail into the Voting Rights Act, Section 5. The point is that we have laws, and people have fought and died to insist upon the government protecting their rights to vote. And we ought not to just be so dismissive of that as if because John Roberts, or you think so, and maybe you haven't experienced it, that somehow these rights are well protected.
By the way,
absolutely not.
John Roberts made that quote, or said that about 4 years ago. I wanted the quote that you're asking me about. I want to go back to Freedom Smitty, as he's called, Kenneth, for a moment. Kenneth, you can hear me. What do you think this says about the state of our country, the moral state of our country, I want to say, the fact that we're even discussing this? So talk to us, from a morality perspective, in your opinion.
Democratic Party.
That
is discrimination because affects especially
minority
population.
Yes, I can hear you.
And second
is
because
I think
doing
America
it just on purpose to come out at this
can we hear Kenneth?
Yes, I can hear. I'm like I'm hearing someone else talking.
Currently, state and federal courts are weighing in on the measures.
We can't hear him in the studio. Kenneth, hold that thought for a second.
Kenneth, what I wanted to say is what we're doing is saying we the people, we the state, no longer can make these decisions. We need a diaper. and that diaper is the federal government. Get the federal government out of here.
When you're trying
We
to
don't
disenfranchise
need that.
voters at the
No,
last
no.
minute.
Can you give me,
That's not
what
what it
are
is.
you basing that on? What do you glean
what
that
are you
about?
not
Basing it
basing
on
it
what the
on?
Secretary of State.
I don't have to
The
disprove
Secretary of
something. You
State
have
of
to prove
Pennsylvania
it.
said it. I haven't heard you
cares
say
what he
that I was
said?
wrong about
Well,
that.
what I'm
He's
concerned
the
about
nothing
state
to do
who
with it.
controls the rights of
nothing
millions
to
of
do with
people to
it.
vote.
Are you saying that they didn't try to sort
It
of
has nothing
cut
to do with it.
voting hours at the last
Fraud
minute in
across the
Florida to
country.
disenfranchise
That
minorities?
will help
thing
Mitt
is-
Romney win. The
In
point is that this is a
Pennsylvania-
Election's over.
demographic.
We need
This
to
is
move
a
on from that.
demographic.
Oh, we're talking
struggle
about the next
that the
election.
Republican
Exactly.
Party sees itself in, and instead of embracing the opportunity to change, and rather than look at demographic change as a real possibility for the party to broaden itself, what we see is a method designed to curtail the rights of individuals who are different and outside of the present
true.
Republican constituency to be a part of it. So rather than change and adapt, the idea is to squeeze the electorate as tight
my
as possible
gosh.
to
Professor, not
Unquote.
everyone
Right.
who disagrees with
Close.
this is a racist
I didn't
or,
say
or
that. I'm
wants to
talking about
suppress
public policy.
minorities.
I'm talking about public policy.
That in itself is, we're never going to get past this if we continue to say, hold on, this is antiquated. We don't need this.
It's not
and
antiquated.
someone standing up
It
and
may be
saying,
to you.
you're racist.
Maybe you didn't have these experiences.
Guys, time out 1 second. I believe we
Maybe
have
it's
Kenneth
antiquated
back.
to you.
Kenneth, are you back on the line?
Yes.
Okay, just give us one final thought. We're wrapping up the segment, but one final brief thought on the topic.
You know, ask me about morals. People, morally, America is growing, but it has a lot to grow. Give an example. Back during 2011, when they were trying to change the voting laws in these states, one of the Republican state senators in Wisconsin is on record by saying registering the poor to vote is like handing out burglar tools to criminals. To make statements like that, to blanket point with a broad brush that minorities who have the right or aspire to vote are potential criminals with their vote. I mean, that's a moral, decadent statement to make about your fellow citizen. So morally, America has done a lot of growth, has come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. And there's no way we can erase what took place 50 years ago overnight.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So there's a lot of issues we have to address each other, to become more kind to each other, more responsive to each other, because we're all Americans. As President Obama, it's not blue states and red states. It's the United States.
Right.
And when we get that in our head, we will be better states.
All right. I want to thank you, Kenneth, Salaam, for joining us. And I just want to remind everybody, marched with Dr. King back in the day. So pretty impressive. And again, if the Voting Rights Act is knocked down, is this erasing the civil rights movement? And that's the other side. Is it just, like he said, is it just knocking down everything that we've done? I don't necessarily think it does, but I just want to thank you guys because we have no more time.
Thank you.
But a spirited debate, and I feel like we could do the whole show on this because it's really interesting.
But everyone should vote. We can agree on that.
Yes, everybody
Everyone
should vote. Thanks, you
And
guys.
that right to vote should be protected.
Yes,
Agreed.
it should.
We all agree with that.
Here,
Safe
here.
votes.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll take it into the commercial break. Coming up, we're going to be discussing a medical first. We'll tell you what it is exactly. You won't want to miss it. That's coming up on Fresh Outlook.